Hey guys, it's Lily. Not today, recently, it's come to my attention in my own self that an anti-inflammatory diet might be good for me. So, of course, I had to dig into it. And I wanted to know where it started. I wanted to know why it started, how it's good for you, what it's supposed to do, what does it look like. So let's talk about it. So, an anti inflammatory diet is supposed to be a style of eating that focuses on foods associated with lower levels of chronic inflammation in the body, and while limiting foods associated with higher inflammatory responses. So, what's important with the anti inflammatory diet is it's not a strict diet plan, it's not a strict only eat this, it's a general eating pattern centered on whole, minimally processed foods. And then I was like, but I already avoid or attempted to avoid processed foods for a while, and I didn't notice any significant difference. I wasn't doing as much as I thought I was. I mean, okay, I was avoiding, I wouldn't call myself having a generic Western diet, but I was not on an anti inflammatory diet. So, the foods emphasized in the anti-inflammatory diet include vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes and beans, nuts and seeds, olive oil and other unsaturated fats, and fish rich in omega-3 fatty acids. The idea is to minimize ultra-processed foods, refined carbs, added sugars, processed meats, and excess saturated fats. Those foods usually contain nutrients such as polyphenols, fibers, antioxidants, and omega-3 fats, which can influence inflammatory pathways and immune signaling in the body. And I'm going to go into how they influence those things, as well as some studies proving or disproving that the anti-inflammatory diet works. But first, I wanted to know why did the anti-inflammatory diet concept begin and become so popular? So, the modern idea of an anti-inflammatory diet largely came from research on the Mediterranean diet in the mid-20th century. So, some key events I could find was that in the 1950s and 1960s, epidemiologist Ansel Keys observed that the Mediterranean populations had much lower rates of heart disease compared to the United States. And they were like, why is that? Why are you guys so much healthier than us? In 1970, the 7-countries study linked dietary patterns with cardiovascular disease risk across multiple countries, again highlighting that those Mediterranean diets had lower populations had lower cardiovascular disease. In 1975, the Mediterranean diet was formally described by researchers, Ansel Keys and Margaret Keys. So those previously mentioned researchers were like, hey, Mediterranean diet, that's a thing. And then in 1990s to 2000s, researchers began connecting the eating pattern not only with heart disease, but also with lower inflammatory biomarkers and reduced chronic disease risk. Later on, looking at 2010, 2008, physicians such as Andrew Weil popularized the term anti-inflammatory diet, describing it as a Mediterranean-style diet with some Asian influences. I didn't know that until I started looking into it. So obviously the anti-inflammatory diet is modeled after a Mediterranean diet, not intentionally, but because the Mediterranean diet, traditionally speaking, was the most ideal. So countries that they often study when looking at a whole life Mediterranean diet is going to be Greece, Italy, especially in the southern regions, Spain, Crete, and coastal areas of France. And I mentioned the occasional Asian tie-ins to the anti-inflammatory diet. Many traditional Asian diets also share similar features to those previously mentioned areas, and they are commonly high in vegetable intake, soy and fermented foods, fish, tea, and herbs, as well as minimally processed foods. Some modern anti-inflammatory diet frameworks combine a Mediterranean and Asian dietary elements to preserve a well-rounded meal plan while still being anti-inflammatory. So now looking at the studies into anti-inflammatory or moderate Mediterranean style diets, showing if they worked. The first study is going to be by Estresh and some other researchers in 2013. They looked for whether a Mediterranean diet could reduce cardiovascular disease and inflammation. They studied it in a randomized controlled trial. There were about 7,500 participants who were at a high risk for cardiovascular disease. Participants in this study were assigned to one of three groups: a Mediterranean diet plus olive oil, a Mediterranean diet plus nuts, and a low-fat controlled diet. In this context, when they're saying Mediterranean diet plus olive oil, Mediterranean diet plus nuts, Mediterranean diet is a focus on fish, lean meats, and produce. So participants were then followed for about 4.8 years, depending on when they checked back in. But what they found was that participants following the Mediterranean diets had about a 30% reduction in major cardiovascular events, including reoccurring heart attacks, stroke, and death. Like, obviously, some of them died because they were already high risk for cardiovascular. They also showed lower inflammatory markers, including CRP and IL-6. Those are going to be measured in blood work. This was interpreted as a study supporting the idea that the Mediterranean-style eating patterns may help reduce both cardiovascular risk and inflammation. The second study was published in 2017 by Medina Rehman and some other researchers. They were looking at whether polyphenols, which are plant compounds found in foods like fruit, vegetables, and olive oil, were linked to inflammation levels. Studied it by analyzing about 1,100 participants. They measured urinary polyphenol levels as an indicator of polyphenol intake and compared them with inflammatory biomarkers. What they found was that higher polyphenol intake was associated with lower inflammatory markers, including interleukin-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, and adhesion molecules related to vascular inflammation. This was interpreted as plant compounds in foods like fruits, vegetables, olive oil, and even moderate wine consumption may contribute to the anti-inflammatory effects seen in the Mediterranean diets. Third study we're going to look at. In 1994, the primary researcher was Lurgoriel, and what they were looking for was whether a Mediterranean diet could help prevent reoccurring heart attacks. So they studied this by having a randomized trial in patients who had already experienced a heart attack. They compared the Mediterranean-style diet to a typical Western diet. What they found was that the Mediterranean diet group experienced about a 50 to 70% reduction in recent heart attacks or death. And this was one of the earliest studies suggesting that dietary patterns similar to the Mediterranean diet may influence cardiovascular and inflammatory processes. In 2003, Trikopoulou and some other researchers published a study looking at whether following a Mediterranean diet was associated with an overall mortality risk. And they studied this by an observational cohort study, over 22,000 participants in Greece. Researchers tracked dietary patterns and health outcomes over time. What they found was that participants who followed the Mediterranean diet more closely had lower overall mortality and lower coronary heart disease risk. They interpreted this as a suggestion that long-term adherence to this dietary pattern may be associated with improved health outcomes at a population level. Obviously, there are some criticisms to these studies as you look at them and you look at someone else analyzing them. So some examples include the first study I mentioned. They had some methodological corrections. So later reflecting on it, they were like, we probably shouldn't have done it that way, or this person was we're just trusting what they're saying. As well as observational studies cannot prove cause and effect. So even everyone saying this population of people is generally speaking having less heart attacks than this population, it's not automatically cause and effect that it's their diet. Also, health benefits may come from an overall lifestyle factors, such as physical activity, social eating patterns, and lower processed food intake in general, rather than specific nutrients in the Mediterranean diet. So that's all great and all. Why do these nutrients reduce inflammation? I know I need the nutrients, I know my brain likes them, I know my blood, but how does that relate to inflammation? So inflammation in the body is controlled by chemical signals, enzymes, and immune cells. So certain nutrients appear to influence these systems in a way that can reduce inflammatory signaling or help resolve inflammation once it begins. Omega-3 fatty acids are found in salmon, sardines, walnuts, flax seeds, and chia seeds, and omega-3 fats affect inflammation partly because they compete with omega-6 fats for the same enzymes in the body. So these enzymes convert fats into chemical signals that control inflammation. So when omega-6 fats are used, the signals tend to be more inflammatory, versus when omega-3 fats are used, the signals tend to be less inflammatory and can also produce compounds that help resolve inflammation once it has started. Polyphenols are found in berries, olive oil, tea, cocoa, herbs, and vegetables. Polyphenols can help reduce inflammation by neutralizing reactive oxygen molecules that damage cells, as well as blocking activation of certain inflammatory genes and supporting beneficial gut bacteria. One pathway that polyphenols influence is going to be involving NF-κB, a protein that acts like a switch that turns on many inflammation-related genes. Dietary fiber is going to be found in vegetable, legumes, whole grains, and fruits, and fiber works largely through the gut microbiome. When gut bacteria digests fiber, they produce short-chain fatty acids, and these molecules can calm certain immune cells, strengthen the intestinal barrier, and reduce inflammatory signaling. One of these molecules, bitrate, can even influence how inflammation-related genes are expressed. Monosaturated fats are found in olive oil, avocados, and nuts, and these fats support healthier metabolism. I don't know why I said it like that. These fats support healthier metabolism and cell function. Olive oil also contains a compound called oleocanthal, oleo, that, which can interfere with some of the same inflammatory enzymes targeted by common anti-inflammatory medications. So again, that olive oil can go again, like the diet interacting with what you eat. That's something you might not think about. Like if you're taking an anti-inflammatory but then eating something with a lot of olive oil, they could not be interacting well in your system. They also are heavy in antioxidant nutrients. We kind of talked about that. They're found in colorful fruits and vegetables. During normal metabolism, the body produces reactive oxygen species, sometimes called ROS. If too many accumulate, they can damage cells, trigger inflammatory pathways, and activate immune responses. Antioxidants help neutralize these molecules, reducing the chance that they can trigger inflammation. That was a lot. So the big picture on the anti-inflammatory diets is that they likely work through several overlapping mechanisms. They compete for enzymes that produce inflammatory signals, they reduce oxidative stress, and they influence gene pathways related to inflammation, as well as supporting gut bacteria that regulate immune responses. So rather than one magic nutrient, it's an overall dietary pattern, especially diets rich in plants, fiber, and healthy fats, that appear to be the most consistent effect. And that doesn't mean that you have to only eat foods based off a Mediterranean anti-inflammatory diet. Like if you have a couple of your traditional Western meals, it's not going to completely change. It's not going to completely undo any of the work you've put in. However, these studies are saying that this is a lifestyle. So I mean, I know I'm going to try to gear more towards it. We're going to see how it goes because I've been very heavy chicken and beef once a week, and fish I've just never like super got into it. So, but I'm going to try to eat more fish more often and see how that goes. Breakfast is going to be the one that kills me because I like a traditional Western breakfast. And so I'm going to try to make some anti-inflammatory options and see if I like them. The problem is it's a lot easier for me to obsess and then get the ick about like overnight oats and smoothies than it is like a breakfast burrito or a muffin. So I don't know. That being said, I had to look at some meal ideas. So a traditional Mediterranean style, well, not super traditional, but a Mediterranean style anti-inflammatory diet day could look like breakfast, being Greek yogurt with figs, walnuts, and honey, with a side of whole grain toast with olive oil, which I didn't think about putting oil on toast, but I guess that makes sense, and an orange. And coffee or tea is also very common in a Mediterranean lifestyle to have first thing in the morning. Not this much coffee, this much processed creamer, this much granulated sugar. Not that. We're talking like black coffee with some sugar or salt or something, or honey or something like that. I'm not to a point where I can just drink black coffee, so I usually put like a little bit of vanilla extract, some monk fruit sweetener, something. But there's a difference between a Dunkin' ticket this long and 2 creamer cups if you're working towards a healthier lifestyle. Lunch suggestion was a Mediterranean salad, which I know I've tried in the past, and I think I don't like raw onion. And I think that was really the only issue with it. And it takes a lot of prep to cut up all the vegetables, but I need to just do it. Anyway, Mediterranean salad, tomatoes, cucumbers, chickpeas, olives, feta cheese, olive oil, and lemon dressing with a side of whole grain bread and fresh fruit. A snack, which was very popular in a Mediterranean diet and anti-inflammatory lifestyle, was almonds or pistachios and fresh fruit. Dinner, grilled fish with herbs, garlic, and olive oil, as well as a side of roasted vegetables like eggplant, zucchini, peppers, and a second side with whole grains like farro, barley, or brown rice. And I was suggested an optional dessert of fresh berries or fruit, sometimes a small piece of dark chocolate. That's not a dessert. I've been eating cookies for dessert. So I'll probably, okay, so my plan is to like try to gear away from the ultra processed carbs. I've gotten away from like ultra processed meats, but I'm gonna try to get away from ultra processed carbs, try to have fish like 2-3 nights a week. And my breakfast, I have a new breakfast I'm gonna try because of this. I mean, I specifically like the Light and Fit vanilla Greek yogurt because it doesn't have the weird like texture and bitter taste of regular Greek yogurt. But it's not as watery as like the regular like Yoplait regular yogurt. So I have that Greek yogurt, and I blended some blackberries with chia seeds and a little bit of milk last night that I'm gonna try to put on top of it, and like some granola, and we'll see. I don't know. I got a background. I hope it's gonna make words easier to read, and obviously more consistent thumbnails. We'll find out. Till next time. Oh, no. Subscribe or follow if you're on YouTube or Spotify, whatever the button says. Do the button that you support me, that I see you. Do it. Instagram, I'm going to be posting, well, now this will come out after. I'm going to be posting a physique update here shortly. So that is on Instagram. I post my physique updates on there, as well as as well as TikTok gets random content. Till next time.